Chronicles of Maester Uther, to record and preserve the history of Westeros. The events leading up to Robert's rebellion are a tragic tale of betrayal and bloodshed that I shall recount to the best of my ability. Chapter 1. The Fool's Rebellion. It began with the disappearance of Lyanna Stark, the sister of Lord Eddard Stark, who was betrothed to Robert Baratheon. Lyanna was believed to have been abducted by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, who was married to Elia Martell of Dorne. The Starks demanded justice, but instead King Aerys II, Rhaegar's father, had Lord Rickard Stark, Eddard's father, executed along with his brother. And called for the heads of Lord Robert and Lord Eddard, who were both being fostered by Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie. In response, Jon Arryn raised his banners in rebellion alongside Robert and Eddard. Lord Hoster Tully of Riverrun soon joined them after a marriage between Eddard Stark and Catelyn Tully. Other lords soon followed, and the war raged on, with many bloody battles and sieges. But the war took a dark turn when House Lannister, led by Tywin Lannister, sided with the Targaryens. Without a moment's notice, the Lion marched for the Riverlands. A month in, and the siege of Riverrun had begun, and Hoster Tully's forces were outnumbered and outmatched. The walls were quickly breached, and it seemed as though the castle would fall. But just in time, Jon Arryn's host arrived and saved the day. Meanwhile, in the Stormlands. The duel between Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Robert Baratheon had begun and was one of the pivotal moments of Robert's rebellion, and a key factor in the outcome of the war, or at least it was supposed to be. The duel took place outside Storm's End, the ancestral seat of House Baratheon. Prince Rhaegar had led a Targaryen army east to confront the rebel forces under Robert's command, and the two armies clashed in a fierce battle that would come to be known as the Battle of the Storms. During the battle, Robert's army was vastly outnumbered, but his leadership and personal combat prowess rallied his troops and turned the tide of the battle. It was at this point that Prince Rhaegar, who had been leading from the rear, donned his blade and rode out to meet Robert in single combat. According to some accounts, Rhaegar was convinced that he was the prince that was promised in a prophecy, and that his destiny was to save the world from darkness. He believed that he needed to defeat Robert on the battlefield in order to fulfill this prophecy, and that he could not win the war without doing so. The two men charged at each other on horseback, their swords flashing in the sunlight. Robert was armed with his warhammer, a massive weapon that he wielded with deadly accuracy, while Rhaegar was armed with his trusty sword. The duel was fierce and brutal, with both men trading blows and narrowly avoiding death on multiple occasions. Rhaegar was a skilled fighter, but he was ultimately no match for Robert's strength and ferocity. In the end, Robert landed a crushing blow with his warhammer that shattered Rhaegar's breastplate and caved in his chest. The prince fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The death of Prince Rhaegar was supposed to be a turning point in the war, and his defeat on the battlefield was a blow to the Targaryen cause. With their prince dead, the Targaryen army was forced temporarily to retreat, and the rebel forces emerged victorious.
With the crown prince dead, only the Mad King remains.
The duel between Robert Baratheon and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen would go down in history as one of the most significant moments of Robert's rebellion, and would have a lasting impact on the political landscape of Westeros for years to come. The armies of the rebels joined forces in Harroway, getting reports of Targaryen forces approaching. They would move north across the river, where they could outmaneuver any force that would cross it and await further reinforcements. But for unknown reasons, Lords Arryn and Baratheon decided to move south across the river to engage an isolated Targaryen host.
Take it now. It's on. Their armies are split. Go now. Go now. Robert, we must take this battle here.
Gentlemen!
We're coming!
This will decide everything.
The Tullys are coming from the north. We shall slay them!
We have word of 27,000 Dornishmen coming.
This would prove to be their downfall. Little did they know this was the Targaryens' plan to bait the impatient stag into a scenario where they could reinforce the battle from multiple sides. This is considered by many to be the last true battle of the rebellion. It is not known whether Robert and his allies were captured there, or in following skirmishes during their retreat towards the Bloody Gate. The rebels fractured, and many surrendered after the capture of Robert. He and many other lords were taken to the capital, where they awaited their judgment. The trial was presided over by the Mad King's Hand and his most trusted loyalists. Many minor lords were given pardons or light sentences, but as Grand Maester Pycelle writes, this was not given to the Lord Paramounts. Lord Robert Baratheon was sentenced to death, where he would consume wildfire in the middle of court, surrounded by his former allies and bannermen. Next was Lord Paramount Jon Arryn. He was to be stripped of his titles and to be banished to the Night's Watch, where he would take a position as the guardian of the Shadow Tower until his dying days. Lord Eddard Stark was as well stripped of his Lord Paramountcy, and surprising to all, the king would raise Lord Roose Bolton of the Dreadfort to his position and gave him the duty of flaying Lord Eddard Stark alive. Lord Bolton would do this with glee in his heart, and according to rumours, he would do the same to Eddard's newborn child Sansa Stark before Eddard's death. Lastly, Lord Hoster Tully would be given the lightest of all the sentences at the behest of both Lord Paramounts Doran Martell and Mace Tyrell. He would be removed from his position, and his son and heir, Edmure Tully, would be sent to be educated by Mace Tyrell until adulthood. With his removal, Aerys sought fit to place Lord Walter Went to the Lord Paramountcy of the Riverlands, causing much discontent among both loyalists and former rebels. This was the turning point in history. Now truly began the new era of the Mad Dragon.
My will be done.
Chapter 2. An Uneasy Peace. An unruly storm in the ancient halls of Storm's End. A new banner is raised. The griffins of House Connington drape the walls. The new lord of the Stormlands, even with his newfound station, seemed to be constantly lost in thought. According to Septon Edmyn, it is thought he was deeply affected by the war, the loss of his friend the Crown Prince, and the birth of Jon's bastard son Jon Storm, later in his teens nicknamed the Black Griff, were both memories of a terrible wound that could never heal. Much of his time he would be charged with corralling the lords of the Stormlands, not an easy task with such unruly people who considered him a turncloak, until the day the Griffin rose to defy the Mad Dragon. A flourishing garden. The beautiful scenery of Highgarden could entrance any man, but this sight would embolden a young man who had taken his first steps into his new home. Mace Tyrell, alongside Edmure Tully, would travel the eccentric halls of this great castle, the lord humming a tune as a large entourage followed in their footsteps. After his father's foolish rebellion, Edmure would be sent with Lord Tyrell to serve as his squire to ensure that the Tullys could not raise their forces once more. Surprisingly, not a lot is known of what occurred in the Reach at this time, other than the grandiose rebellion organised by Lord Beesbury and many other minor lords wanting further privileges and guarantees by Lord Leighton, who wisely denied their unjust and arrogant demands alongside his allies and trusted lords. While he would not leave the Tower, his son and heir Baelor Hightower would vanquish this rebellion. The Lion's Maw. Lord Tywin Lannister's choice to stand with the Targaryens is one that shocked all. As his reward for supporting the king, he would be returned to high station as Hand of the King, undisputed Warden of the West, and most importantly, the king would marry Cersei Lannister. But once the war had been won, surprising to none, King Aerys would not fulfill his promise of marrying Cersei. In private, reportedly calling her a damaged lioness that hungered for more than he was willing to deal with. In the eyes of many of the lords, Tywin was seen as the true saviour of the war, for if it was not for him, many speculate the loyalists would have lost the war. I for one say that is certain. The Westerlands would fall into civil war, An uprising of conspiring lords would rise against Lord Tywin. The war was brutal, with lords and sons of all major houses dying in battle, but slowly the war was turning against the Lannisters. How was this possible, you ask? How would the mighty lion fall to some upstarts? That is something that still perplexes me. Many of my colleagues believe this to be the work of King Aerys II, a plot to undermine Lord Tywin and his family. But what the Mad Dragon did not count on was the Honourable Lord Randyll Tarly. He came to the Lannisters' aid, undoubtedly an order from the gracious and noble Lord Paramount Mace Tyrell. With their aid, these foul lords were crushed and swiftly removed, both from their holding and this plane of existence. Unbowed, unbent, unbroken. After Robert's rebellion, Prince Doran Martell of Dorne faced many challenges as he tried to restore order to his homeland. One of the biggest problems he faced was the ongoing feud between the Dornish lords, which threatened to tear the region apart. Prince Doran was a cautious man, and he knew that he needed to tread carefully if he wanted to keep the peace. He spent much of his time traveling throughout Dorne, meeting with the lords and trying to mediate their disputes. He also worked to improve the lives of his people, investing in infrastructure and education, and building alliances with other High Lords. Despite his best efforts, the feuding between the lords continued. Lord Anders Ironwood was one of the most vocal opponents of Prince Doran's policies, and the two men clashed frequently. It is unclear exactly what caused Prince Doran to order Lord Anders Ironwood's murder, but it is believed that he saw it as a necessary step to ensure the stability of the region. The assassination of Lord Anders Ironwood sent shockwaves through Dorne. Many of the lords were outraged, and some openly defied Prince Doran's rule. However, the prince was able to maintain control through a combination of diplomacy and force. Despite the controversy surrounding his actions, Prince Doran remained a beloved figure among his people for a time. He was seen as a wise and just ruler who had worked tirelessly to protect his homeland and his people. His legacy would endure long after his death as a symbol of the resilience and strength of the Dornish people. The Guardian. After Robert's rebellion, the Vale of Arryn was in a state of flux. Lord Jon Arryn, who had been banished to the Wall, left his realm to his unborn son Ondred Arryn, but being that he was a newborn, a Lord Protector needed to be put in place. This left the Vale in a precarious position, with many of the lords vying for power and influence. During this time, Petyr Baelish, who had been the ward of Hoster Tully, appeared. After the rebellion, he returned to the Vale and married Lysa Tully, the divorced wife of Jon Arryn. With Lysa's support, Petyr Baelish became the Lord Protector of the Vale, with the power to rule in Ondred Arryn's name until he came of age. This decision angered many of the lords of the Vale, who had been loyal to House Arryn for generations. They saw Baelish as an outsider who had wormed his way into a position of power through cunning and manipulation. However, Baelish was determined to hold on to his position, and he worked tirelessly to win over the support of the Vale lords. Baelish invited Samwell Arryn, the Lord of the Port of Arryn and a distant relative of the Arryns, to the Eyrie. This move angered his mother, Ellyn Shett, who saw it as a blatant attempt to intimidate and undermine the Arryns' hold on the Vale. She wrote to all the lords of the Vale, calling Baelish a pretender who should be removed from power. This has caused a great deal of tension within the Vale, with some lords supporting Baelish and others siding with Ellyn Shett and the Arryns. The future of the Vale remains uncertain, with many wondering if Baelish's grip on power will be strong enough to survive the challenges that lie ahead. The river flows with blood. Following the end of the war, House Tully's hold on the Riverlands weakened as Lord Went of Harrenhal was raised to the position of Lord Paramount, replacing Hoster Tully. This caused a great deal of frustration and anger among the Tullys, who felt that their rightful place had been taken away from them. However, they bided their time and began to quietly build alliances and support among the lords of the Riverlands. Lord Went, meanwhile, was keenly aware of the simmering tension between House Tully and his own house. He attempted to maintain good relations with the Tullys, even going so far as to extend invitations to them to visit Harrenhal. However, the Tullys remained suspicious of his intentions. As the years passed, the Tullys continued to work behind the scenes, building their alliances and preparing for the moment when they could take back control of the Riverlands. Their plan was to oust Lord Went from his position as Lord Paramount and restore the Tullys to their rightful place. However, Lord Went was not entirely oblivious to the Tullys' machinations. He began to suspect that they were plotting against him, and he took measures to protect himself and his family. The Riverlands remained in a state of uncertainty, as the balance of power between House Tully and House Went remained uncertain. The question of whether House Tully's actions were justified or a betrayal of trust continued to divide the region, with some lords supporting House Tully's bid to reclaim their place as the ruling house of the Riverlands, while others remained loyal to Lord Went. The North remembers. After the fall of Lord Eddard Stark, the North fell into darkness, with Lord Bolton being raised as Lord Paramount of the North. It was a time of great fear and uncertainty, as the new lord brought with him a wave of tyranny and depraved actions that would make the Mad King Aerys seem tame in comparison. Lord Bolton was known to enjoy the suffering of his enemies and was rumoured to have a twisted fascination with flaying his victims alive. His halls were filled with the screams of those who dared to cross him, and his dungeons were filled with those who opposed his rule. The people of the North lived in constant fear of the new lord, with whispers of secret plots and rebellion spreading throughout the land. The phrase, "the North remembers," was whispered in hushed tones, and some lords even dared to plot in secret against the new tyrant. Lord Bolton's reign of terror only grew worse with time, with rumours of even more twisted and sadistic acts committed in his name. The people of the North prayed for a hero to rise up and free them from the grip of this madman, but none came. The nights were filled with screams, and the days were filled with despair. It seemed as though there was no end to the madness that had taken hold of the North. But even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Some whispered of a prophecy, of a chosen one who would rise up and overthrow the tyrant, bringing peace and prosperity back to the North. Only time would tell if this prophecy would come true, or if the people of the North would forever live in fear under the cruel rule of Lord Bolton. The Mad Dragon.
My will be done.
After winning the Fool's Rebellion, King Aerys II, Targaryen's rule became even more erratic and unpredictable. He had always been known for his paranoia, but now it was reaching new heights. His mistrust of his own lords and advisors caused him to become increasingly isolated, relying only on his loyal Kingsguard and a few trusted maesters. Despite the king's deteriorating mental state, many of his loyalists continued to support him. They saw him as a just ruler who had defended the realm from rebellion and who was now simply misunderstood. But as Aerys's grip on reality slipped further, even his most ardent supporters began to fear for the future of the Seven Kingdoms. The small council, led by Tywin Lannister, struggled to control the king's behavior and feared for the stability of the realm. Some lords began to whisper about the need for a change in leadership, that it was time for the young Prince Aegon to take charge, but they knew that any open challenge to Aerys would lead to another devastating war. But the days of the Mad Dragon is not yet at an end. King Aerys Targaryen still stands strong, but the question is, for how long?